There's actually something in the world of psychology called the emotions wheel or the feelings wheel. And I think that's an important starting point for a person if they're not exactly aware of what exactly they're feeling, because as I talked about in video number 1 on feelings, about empathic feelings, there are layers of belief systems, of emotional pain that all put together can make things seem quite confusing. And I talked about simplifying that in that first video on feelings. And today I hope to bring some perspective in terms of simplifying the judgment that we bring to our feelings. So even though the emotions wheel and the feelings wheel is definitely a great resource that you can look up, I really don't want any of us to ever get stuck in the details about emotions. And that's why the emotions wheel that I want to reference is one that talks about just 6 categories of emotions. Basically, on the positive side of emotions, it's looking at emotions of being peaceful, powerful, feeling joyful. And then on the negative side, we've got feelings of being scared, being mad, and being sad. And in terms of judgment of emotions, it's always the negative emotions that we judge. We've learned this from a very, very early age, from all aspects of our upbringing, our parents, our family life, our teachers, and the different feedback we got when we were growing up amongst our peers. And all of that was a learning from the outside. And it was definitely letting us know what was judged if we expressed a certain feeling or felt a certain feeling. And I think we've all experienced it. And yet we can have different levels of how strongly those were judged. And whether or not they're judged strongly from the outside, it's always true that what we do is we judge so strongly from the inside. We judge ourselves, especially because of empathic feeling. We take upon ourselves this high standard of what's okay and what's not okay. And so early on, we're obviously made aware that the negative feelings are usually not considered okay or not appropriate in that moment. And therefore, we suppress or repress them and set them to the side. And the worst part about it is the judgment we put on it. And in place of it, we're telling ourselves, be nice, don't be silly, and things like, don't make a big deal out of nothing. And yet, by doing so, we have to remember that judgment in that sense is always a separation from where we really are at that moment. That's just how we're feeling right then. But that separation, I see it as a mind, heart, and spirit separation. We're kind of compartmentalizing what we should be always trying to bring together and make cohesive. So we feel something, so there's our heart again, and then we think certain things about it, which is the mind separating, judging the feelings. And a lot of us really do believe that spirit is unhappy with certain kinds of feelings that may come up for us. And in that separation, that's where the agony is, in my opinion. That's where judgment feels so terrible. And we're doing it to ourselves, mostly unconsciously. And because it's still there, because as empathic feeling, it is just an all-encompassing feeling, no matter what it is that we feel, when we're judging it, we still need expression of it. And if we're not able to tone down judgment of it so that we can allow ourselves to feel it, it is going to turn into feelings of judgment towards others. So we first judge our own feelings, and sometimes we're not even conscious of it. That's why that emotions or feelings wheel could maybe be a good starting point if we're not even understanding, what am I feeling? And then maybe we can narrow down, but not to get stuck in those details, because while those are good vocabulary words to help us understand, help us develop some emotional intelligence about ourselves, it's never a place that we want to linger too long, because feelings are malleable and changeable, and at Pivot Your Perspective, it's always just a messenger. So we're always going to go beyond that. We're always going to let the feelings take us somewhere. And that's why if we have been judging our feelings and we're basically stuck there, the expression that is desiring to come forward is going to have some outlet. And that's where feelings of judgment come in. It usually will escalate to an us versus them kind of approach, a kind of thinking, a kind of feeling, because of that mind, heart, spirit separation that we are struggling with and we may not be aware of. And from there, it turns into its own problem. It can be focused inward, where it's you against your feelings. And when you're against your feelings, that creates a dis-ease within our bodies. Or it can be focused on a us versus them, and who's going to get the brunt of that is someone close to you, someone in relationship with you that you can be kind of your worst self with. And that can create disintegrating relationship. Or it can be a type of avoidance that, we just become more and more shuttered off because of not being accepting of our own feelings, and yet not being okay with judging others either. And so we're maybe in a little bit of a trap of just absolute avoidance of any feelings. Some years ago when I was really in a much more overwhelmed place, and I didn't realize that I was in judgment of my feelings, or maybe just didn't have enough time to actually address them. I was busy with the 4 children. We were homeschooling. Lauren was often off deployed with the US Army. So it was an overwhelming time. And I would definitely get to the point of capacity, couldn't take anymore. And while I handled everything smoothly, I never was too terrible in pushing my judgment outward. I didn't realize how much I wasn't allowing my own time to just feel whatever I was feeling. And for me, that definitely turned into anger. It turned into deep sadness. And all in all, those layers of negative emotions needed an outlet. And for me, I turned to journaling. I have several spiral bound notebooks that are filled with different levels of intensity in my writing, depending on how much I was getting out in that particular journaling my thoughts and my feelings down moments. And I would often get to the point of needing to finally have a good cry. Now that was my approach, and it wasn't like I planned for it. It was simply when I think it was deep in my heart, just crying out for, I need relief. I don't like how I feel, but I'm stuck. And I even had my own anthem. That song, This Girl Is on Fire. Oh man, the first time I heard Alicia Keys singing that song, it just brought so much up in me where I felt like, yes, that's right. I am not going to judge myself. I am sufficient as I am. I am enough. And I just was able to settle down to less of a inner critic demanding constantly of me, because I was very much in judgment of myself in so many ways. And I stopped needing so much to do something with that judgment. I instead became more of an observer of that judgment. And those having a good cry, having an anthem, dancing around the house if I needed to, these are good things to try when we are moving into less judgment of our feelings and simply learning to be with them and release the old patterns of what we were taught about what's okay to feel, what's not okay to feel. Because in observing with mind, heart, and spirit, whatever feelings come up, the best thing that happens is we can just see them as our starting point where we meet them with our mental capacity, our emotional, we're meeting these emotions, but we're bringing spirit in at the same time. And we're wanting to make that valid, that whatever is, spirit will accept us where we are, and then will help us to move to where we want to be. Because if you think about that emotions wheel, the feelings wheel, it definitely had not only the negative emotions of scared and mad and sad in general terms, with many, many different detailed words that even more specifically describe what we might be feeling, but it also had the more positive, the peaceful, the powerful, and the joyful feelings. And if we have capacity for all of that, then I don't think that any of them is necessarily bad. How can it be? But in addressing and meeting those feelings that make us feel bad, remember, it's the separation that we've created for ourselves, where we tell ourselves, nope, we're not allowed to, we shouldn't have those types of feelings. The separation is what feels bad. It's not the feeling itself. And I'll be going into talking about interpretation of feelings in the next video. And I definitely feel that that's where if a bad feeling or a negative so-called feeling makes us feel bad, it has so much more to do with interpretation than it actually has to do with the feeling. So in closing, I would just like to say it's definitely reasonable and it's valid that no matter where you are and how you're feeling, that's just where you are in your emotional landscape. And it has to be valid because you have to meet yourself where you are. And from there, with mind, heart, and spirit intention, it's important that you have given yourself that safe space to just feel the emotion. Obviously, don't ever act from a place of emotion. That's too volatile. However, it's so important that as we're talking about feelings, as we're developing and building emotional health for ourselves in practice, it's important to think of how can I give myself some room, some space to actually be with my feelings. So for me, it was, I'd be waiting until the end of the day or waiting till the kids were maybe taking a nap. And I would sometimes lock my door and I'd dissolve into tears and be on the floor until I was spent. And that is cathartic, that it was a safe space and I didn't have to think about the feelings. I was just feeling the feelings. And maybe a big part of our judgment can then be released because we're no longer stuck up here in our minds. We are simply just being with wherever that feeling is because we've had that safe space and we know that feeling it will not result in hurting anyone else. There's that saying that you need to feel it to heal it. And it might sound trite. I can only say that has been true for me. But in feeling it to heal it, it's so vital that we recognize mind, heart, spirit for ourselves, not what we've been told in the spiritual side, not what we are bringing to the mental side based on what we were taught and what we learned, but simply the active now experience of mind, heart, and spirit being called upon to come together and in the feeling of it, releasing it to that. The healing is profound. It doesn't mean that it all just goes away and nothing ever bothers us again, but it does mean that that feeling in its complexity has been neutralized and the painful aspects have been released because we've actually allowed ourselves to feel them.